السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يا ربي لك الحمد حتى ترضى، ولك الحمد إذا ما رضيت، ولك الحمد بعد الرضا، ولك الحمد أبدا أبدا أبدا. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. الحمد لله الذي لم يتخذ ولدا ولم يكن له شريك في الملك ولم يكن له ولي من الذل وكبره تكبيرا. Inshallah ta'ala, I wanted to share an insane amount of things with you in this talk, so brace yourselves. I'll start with something very simple. My personal thesis is that we have reduced ourselves by and large, and this is changing very slowly, and I think there are some encouraging signs, but by and large, we have reduced ourselves to a generation of being entertained by speeches. And again, like I said, this is changing, but changing very slowly. What's happening around the country is that masajid are full of very highly qualified a'immah, du'at, people are giving lectures, conferences being held, talks being given, and people are attending these talks, and there's a huge degree of Allahu Akbar at the end of these talks, and 40 minutes later if you ask the attendees, what did you hear? It was a really nice Islamic lecture. It was very good. And wallahi, ya akhi, my heart, what do you remember? The speaker, I think he has a pet, he talked about that. It was a story about something, but it was really good. You got to listen to a recording or something, right? So what we've done is, we've got a couch potato understanding of learning, okay? Like we sit back and we watch TV, right? It doesn't require any effort. It's the same thing, you sit back and you listen to a lecture. You chill. Right? And unfortunately, I'm sorry to put you guys on the spot, it's brothers more than sisters. Because by and large, what's happening in conferences more and more, not that a lot of sisters don't slack off, please don't get me, I'm not, buttering anybody up. There's enough, slackers on both sides. But typically what's happening is you'll find the sisters and taking notes, writing things down, taking things seriously, asking serious questions, and brothers are chewing gum. And so unfortunately, this is what I've seen over and over and over again. I have a theory about that too, but this is not the time. So the first thing that I want to do is, pose this question. There are, we've heard of some amazing, da'is around the country, and we have in some of our masajid, like I said, awesome imams, that give these khutbahs and give these talks, and the people are listening to them, and, khutbah after khutbah after khutbah after khutbah, 10 years. And before 10 years, you take a survey of the level of the people that are sitting there. And then you come back 10 years later and you take a survey of the level of the people that are sitting in the audience. It's the same people, guess what? At the same level pretty much. Except very few that made an effort on their own, but most of them are sitting there exactly the same as they were before. So there's a serious problem here. We're not maturing in terms of knowledge, right? This is the first issue. The second issue is, by every generation of Islam, what's happened is, of course, there's a deterioration in Islamic values, or the upholding of Islamic values, but the more serious deterioration, in my understanding, is not that of not upholding the value, is not knowing the values. How can you uphold something you don't know? So the bar on the bare minimum knowledge of Islam has come down. So what your parents knew about Islam, or what your grandparents knew about Islam from their parents, right, your great-grandparents, was quite a bit more than what your grandparents learned. And what your parents learned from your parents, or from your grandparents, is less. And what you guys learned about Islam from your parents is much less than that, right? Most of you are Sunday schoolers, right? A bunch of you are just MSA people. That's it. That's all you know of Islam, is your MSA experience. That's very little. That's a seriously small amount. So the level of knowledge has seriously deteriorated. And of course, we are all, overconfident in what little we know. So what we do is, we learn a little bit, and because that's all of Islam for us, and anything that doesn't match that little bit that we know must be deviant or misguided or, out of the fold or, unacceptable, because it doesn't fit our little world of study. The world is much bigger than our small experience. They call this the primacy effect in psychology, right? That you're in a certain locality and you're only exposed to certain things, and your worldview is based on those few things that you're exposed to. So that's basically what's happening. We're exposed to a few speeches, a few MP3 downloads, and that's it. That's our Islam. So there's a very dangerous, very immature approach to knowledge that is, that's by and large spread. But again, very few are actually stepping out of this and taking Islam and the study of Islam more and more seriously. The second thing I wanted to mention, and there are 5 things I want to mention. So the second thing I want to mention is that to actually sustain knowledge of Islam, there are certain prerequisites, and they can never be compromised. So if any of you are serious about learning Islam, and of course learning Islam is for 2 reasons, right? Learning and teaching. And in between is implementing. Learning, implementing, and then teaching, right? If any of you are serious about this stuff, any of you are serious about learning Islam, and because the Messenger ﷺ already commanded us, be a student or be a teacher and don't be a third. So since most of us aren't teachers, what do we have to be? Students. There's no choice. And of course when the Messenger says students, he doesn't mean students at the University of College Park. He means students of Islam, right? Of course you can be students here too, that's fine, or wherever you're coming from. But we need to be students of Islam at the same time. Now, to be students of Islam, there's one unique prerequisite that is different from most other sciences, and that's memorization. And I'm talking about academic prerequisites first, okay? Memorization is a critical requirement of Islamic studies. You can't study Islam and you can't consider yourself a student of Islam if part of your agenda and part of your core requirement, so to speak, part of your first 60 credits isn't memorization, Quran memorization, Hadith memorization, right? And going beyond that, memorization of the opinions of Sahaba, etc. But of course the primary first, Quran memorization, a significant chunk of Quran, we should all have. And if you don't have that, then you're learning fiqh and you're learning comparative Sharia issues and history of Islam, and see, those are all secondary. And what's primary? The Book of Allah. You can't jump to the secondary if you don't have the primary. It doesn't make sense, right? Because that shapes your understanding of everything else. So Quran and Sunnah first, and then the secondary literature. But of course, we don't study Quran and Sunnah in isolation, and we don't study it, avoiding the wealth of scholarly literature that's available. So that was the first point that makes Islamic studies unique. The second issue that I wanted to bring to your attention is, all of you, how many students we have here in the audience? Just students, not of anything. Okay. Or have been students, pretty much all of us, right? At some point or another. Now, one of the things that makes someone a student is the ability to do research. Wouldn't that be considered correct? Right? So when you're a student in the field of biology or finance or computer information systems or whatever, right? You're given a paper to do, you're given some research to do, and you hit the library and you hit the books and you find out what it is that the answers you seek. Citations, right? Your paper's full of a bibliography. So we're saying that we have to become students of Islam, which means we have to be able to do what in Islam? Research. Critical, isn't it? Now, if you have to do research in Islam, of course you have to be able to hit sources. When you go to the libraries in the West for Islamic research, you are going to find books written by and large by Muslims or non-Muslims? Non-Muslims. Non-Muslims in the English language. And many of them may have good intentions, but by and large we cannot assume, we cannot put our Islam in their hands and let them give it to us. It just doesn't make sense. They don't believe in it. They don't believe it's the truth. So how can you believe they'll give it to us in a fair and balanced way? It just can't be, right? So we have basically put our whole deen in their hands when we talk about Islamic research in the West, unless we have something of our own. Some standing of our own. So you want to do research on your own. Google is not a research tool for Islam. Okay, just for a reality check. Nor are more Islamic fatwa websites that you just punch in the word, oh, I know what Islam says about this now. Because, 4 hits came up and I'm going to print these and this is my khutbah this week. Right? So what our version of Islam is whatever we find online, really. That's what it's come down to, because we don't have access to anything else. Now, primary sources of Islam are what? Quran and Sunnah. Then what are the secondary sources? The understanding of the Sahaba, the Tabi'un, the great scholars that followed them, right? That did incredible volumes of research on the primary sources. The volumes of tafsir, the sharh of hadith, etc. Right? This is all the research materials we have. And there's a huge wealth of this knowledge. What language does it sit in? In the Arabic language. By and large, the research materials of Islam are still sitting in the Arabic language. And of course, when you translate Quran, what happens? Don't you lose something in translation? And maybe you don't know Arabic enough to know that there's always something lost in translation. So imagine if multiple volumes of literature was translated, wouldn't you lose something in translation? Yeah? So your research is going to be secondary at best. it's not going to be considered academic whatsoever because you didn't consult any primary sources. You didn't actually study what Imam Ghazali says or Imam Al-Qurtubi rahimahullah says. You studied a translation offered by someone of what he said. Right? So your research is secondary. And that's even of the secondary sources. Right? So what has to happen? To be able to be a student in a subject, you have to be able to do research in that subject. To be able to do research in a subject, you have to know the language of that subject. So for serious students of Islam, Arabic is a primary prerequisite. Can from the audience I hear some titles of Islamic sciences? What are some Islamic sciences? Usul al-fiqh, tafsir, go on. Hadith, seerah, right? What else? Aqidah. Right? These are some popular Islamic sciences that we know about at least, right? All of them sit on the foundation of what? Language. Aqidah becomes a linguistic discussion many times. Fiqh becomes a linguistic discussion many times. Seerah is a study of literature that's in the Arabic language, primarily. Right? So you got, name the science, you name it, and you have to rely on the Arabic language. And you know what we do? We have this fun thing we do. We have the speaker will come and he'll say, the root word of this is this, and it traces back to that, and you're like, whoa, that's deep, man. And this Arabic is, whoa, mashallah. Well, you don't even know if he said what he said is right. You can't even look it up, but you're like, that was deep. It's Arabic, oh. So we've got an extremely immature approach to appreciating knowledge. And one of the things that's going to mature us in our knowledge, again, I'm talking about academic prerequisites, is knowledge of the Arabic language. This is one of the many essential prerequisites that are being ignored. Now, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, "Al-ilmu bit-ta'allum wal-hilm bit-tahallum." That knowledge doesn't come except by serious study. The essence of the hadith is knowledge doesn't come except by serious study. And this is only the first part of the hadith. And understand something about that hadith. Listening to speeches is not serious study, is it? It's more entertaining. Right? It's more fun. It's actually even somewhat of a, I used to listen to music, now I listen to a sheikh. It's fun. I'm driving and it's passing time. But studying is like studying for a lecture in college, right? You're sitting there, you're taking notes, you're sweating it out, you're following up with textbooks afterwards. It's serious study. It's not fun, right? And we have reduced Islamic studies to what is fun. And whenever the fun stops, we stop. Right? That's basically what's happened. So you start studying Arabic. And I'm going to study, I'm real fired up, I'm going to just go buy an Arabic book. I'm going to go to IslamicBookstore.com, support your local Islamic bookstore, and go to IslamicBookstore.com and pick some Arabic books. And what happens? You start reading subjunctive, conjunctive. Forget this. And then we've got these volumes of books on our shelves. They're really nice. And somebody comes in and goes, whoa, you got some nice books here. But have you read any of them? No, they're really shiny. And that's proof that you've not read any of them, right? And you haven't mutilated any of your books with notes and you haven't beat them up, really. That just tells you that you haven't really done much with books. And that's how I tell students are studying in their sophomore and freshman years. They buy these expensive textbooks, right? They don't even buy the used copies because there's too much college prestige. So they buy these new textbooks and they're still glossy and to just barely take off the plastic wrapping. They haven't studied anything. Because, they haven't hit those books. So the first thing that has to happen is we need to develop a serious attitude about studies. Serious attitude. And we're talking, you have to give in hours, like you give in hours taking a course in anything else, right? And people talk about, what's the best translation that I can study? What's the best book that I can read in English? And you're going to keep asking those questions that are, again, taking you to secondary knowledge. And if you want to be a resource for others and really, truly benefit yourself, what do you have to do? Become a real student of Islam. And you can't do that until you do the hard part, study Arabic. You can't. Okay, so this is the first thing I wanted to make mention of, and I'm going to close this point, which is point number 2, and I'm going to really run fast now, with a couple of statements that I think should give you a perspective on how important this subject area is. Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah, لَوَاجِبْ عَلَى كُلِّ مُسْلِمٍ أَنْ يَتَعَلَّمْ مِنْ لِسَانِ الْعَرَبِ بِقَدْرِ جُهْدِهِ. It is absolutely mandatory on each and every Muslim that he study the language of the Arabic language to the best of his ability. Who said this? Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah. He says, I studied language, طلبت اللغة والأدب. I studied language and literature for 20 years, and I had no intention except to increase me in fiqh, to give me depth in fiqh, and that is why I studied the Arabic language. Again, Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah. Ibn Hazm rahimahullah, very profound statement. كيف يكون مأمونا على العلم من لا يحسن اللغة? How can someone be trusted in knowledge if they don't excel in language? And of course he means the Arabic language. How can someone be trusted with knowledge? Knowledge. I shared the hadith with you before. Actually, I'll come to that at the end.